Greetings, my name is Michael Miller. This is a Michael Miller trademark training video out to you because you're watching. Thank you and welcome. It's meant for Michael Miller Pilates licensed affiliates, the Core New Core, my patrons, Clayton, Ruby, and Stephanie. I need a few more to cover the cost of my website. Please go to patreon.com and search for Michael Miller Pilates and become a patron. And it's also meant for anybody, it's mostly meant, this broadcast, for anybody that wants to survive and thrive as a Pilates instructor from being aware of this point of view that the broadcast is all about. This is just one point of view out of as many people as there are that do Pilates. Because ultimately Pilates is what we consider it to be within our own simulation of what it's like out there in general, and specifically what Pilates is. Just one way of looking at it. So this broadcast has taken it up in stride with a daily constant contact email to my list that I only turn on before the solstice and maybe at the end of the year to communicate to the people that are on my list that seem happy to stay on the list. Even without opening anything I do, they stay on the list. I don't know, human nature is pretty strange sometimes. So my email today is just titled, What If? And then inside the email is the two questions. What if the prefrontal cortex is where thinking happens? And what if the amygdala and hippocampus are where observing happens? What if? So, those names are three different parts of the brain, and there's a graphic. I found a great graphic of a child, really, but a human being, with just the outline of the brain and pointing to the prefrontal cortex, which is up here in front, thinking, and the amygdala and hippocampus, which are much smaller and more at the root of the reptilian origins of the brain. Okay. So what if prefrontal cortex is where you do your thinking, and somewhere beyond the thinking, see, something other than thinking, is this key distinction for you coming to understand the point of view of MMP. Joe didn't talk about complete coordination of body, mind, and more mind. He talked about body, mind, and spirit. Now, for whatever he meant by that word, the MMP point of view takes spirit to mean observing. And so there's all these other views out there. This one particular view, based on a theory that there's an ideal within the original work, specifically the evidence. Something must have fell. I think it was my gonger fell onto the bowl. That's a surprise when you hear of something and you don't know where it's coming from. So my point is, if you're willing to take a point of view that body, mind, and spirit is being, thinking, and observing, and allowing that observing is something other than thinking, and limiting thinking to see it's a very specific point of view that in some ways makes vast generalities, but it takes thinking as prefrontal cortex and something other than thinking that provides information to the thinking, which seems to require the observing of the information to have it happen, right? Amygdala and hippocampus, sources of something other than thinking that, for the Pilates instructor, explains spirit just within a human being. They have body, they have mind, and they have spirit, and in spirit, it's observing. Oh, and that's why I went looking for my book, the Judd Robbins, Lynn Van Hewitt Robbins version, which I use because my name is in it, and I take issue with it because of things that don't matter. Forgive me for reading to you, but the only unchanging rules you must conscientiously obey are that you must always faithfully and without deviation follow the instructions accompanying the exercises. Now here's the part that I have highlighted. And always keep your mind wholly concentrated on the purpose of the exercises as you perform them. So, that is vitally important in order for you to gain the results sought. Otherwise, there would be no valid reason for your interest in contrology. So here's what that means to me. Your thinking, your concentration, see, your thinking is present, at least when I'm doing the work. My thinking is reaching towards the purpose of the exercises as I'm performing them. And if by mind, in Michael Miller Pilates, we go body, mind, spirit is being, thinking, observing, then this is Joe's comment about mind and thinking is to be wholly concentrated on the purpose of the exercises as you perform them. Now, when it comes to everything I've said to you about, in one word, Pilates is exercise. In 2 words, it's corrective exercise. And that the purpose of the instructor is to enable the student to respond to their own sensation in reaching for the purpose of the exercise as they do them. See what I'm saying? For me, the only way to have your thinking or your mind totally concentrated on the purpose of the exercises is to indeed have the ideal in mind that you're reaching for. As you perform them is saying to me that corrective feedback loop, meaning you have to do what? You have to listen. You have to observe. So in MMP, spirit is observing. And observing can be attributed to, maybe not necessarily will ultimately be considered, but it can easily be attributed to something other than mind, something other than thinking. And in MMP, that's the source of information that the thinking gets that comes from baser parts of the brain, like the amygdala and the hippocampus. So the amygdala part of the brain determines instinctively flight or fight kind of thing. It comes way before your brain starts thinking about anything, amygdala does. And I don't know why hippocampus became named hippocampus, but because of hippopotamus, and my trying to remember the name hippocampus, I think of a hippopotamus whose eyes just come above the surface of the water. And all of them is below that, but the eyes that are looking around are doing what? Are seeing where they are in space, or seeing where the hippo is in space. And the hippocampus as a part of the brain, so far what a layman makes of what I read about, what that part of the brain does, it's a hippo looking around, keeping track of where you are in space. So when I drive down this one stretch of road, for some reason it seems so indistinctive that I wonder where I am, even though I know that I'm headed to where I'm supposed to get. See? And to me, that's like the hippocampus coming in to play where it loses track or doesn't recognize where you are. It's those kinds of primordial functions that the being and the thinking and the observing has to coordinate. And so maybe you can make the argument that this is all about thinking, or that it can only be about thinking, and yet this totally concentrated on the purpose of the exercise. How are you totally concentrated on it unless you're paying attention to the feedback that comes out of the effort, right? The sensation out of the effort. And that's the corrective feedback loop that I'm talking about all the time. So this subject that we're talking about, the very next sentence, this is vitally important in order for you to gain the results sought. So if you're looking for the results from contrology, that may not hold true of the word Pilates, but at least the name of Joe's book, if you're looking to gain the results sought, otherwise there would be no valid reason for your interest in contrology. He calls it contrology, right? And so it's within MMP and this assumption of being, thinking, and observing being the capacities that the instructor seeks to coordinate to the point where the student then is capable of coordinating themselves. Is the experience that you're after, and yet the doing of Pilates is the doing of the mat, the exercises on the mat and the sequence that they're in. That is the statement. Now, I've been told quite plainly that I'm completely wrong, and actually it's because it was the reformer. The person called and wanted reformer videos, And I said, you do know that the mat came before the reformer, don't you? And she says, oh no, you're wrong. And it's like, okay, how many videos do you want? Right? You can't deny a person their right to suffer. But have they been interested in knowing, from the MMP point of view, the mat is the method. The choreography within the mat is a direct reaction to a human being's presence in reality, and of course the recognition that if you don't pay attention you don't survive very, very long. And to the extent that you do pay attention and you do honor, it's a good word I think, the ideal nature of reality insofar as the 3D space that we occupy, and I'm just talking about plain simple, front and back and sideways. And our interest in surviving as a human being within that space. So what do you get in looking at Pilates this way, or at least seeing, being, thinking, and observing? And that the presence of those pieces are all within the human being, or those capabilities, are all within the human being. When a person says, I felt so present, right? You become more present in some situations. Well, in Pilates is a situation where all of this concentrating and observing and attention playing brings you into a higher state of presence. And that's a really good thing if you want to survive. And in that higher state of presence, what have you done? The title of Joe's book starts out as a statement, return to life. So that higher state of presence is a return to life. And in doing the mat, you honor the stage in which life is occurring. And in so doing, become more present in your participation on that stage, in reality, in gravity. The other question I had was, what does that mean? Well, it means that you're utilizing what you're capable of and reaching to develop more capability. The ideal is one thing. Human bodies within the ideal are a whole nother matter. It goes from ideal to real, right? And there you stand, or sit, or lie, or sit in a chair, or however you're positioned, but in some way you're acting as an instructor, helping someone connect to the universe faster than light in doing this. Acting like Yoda, telling a person to do what? To observe. Have their observing be part of their effort. So, number two. Do you believe Joe is the title. Do you believe Joe? And I started off with words. First of all, well, let me go right to what we've already covered. Always keep your mind wholly concentrated on the purpose of the exercises as you perform them. Well, to do that, you have to know what the purpose of the exercise is. Or, to the extent that you understand the purpose of the exercise, is the extent to which you can be wholly concentrated. When you go diving into your effort in Pilates, the depth is up to you. And no matter how deep or how far you get, unless you just cease to exist and float away as driftwood, you come back up to the surface, wishing you could go back down and stay there in terms of being so focused, of being so connected to what you are sensing as a human being, and adjusting your effort based on what you sense. There's a lot of other distraction in the world for all of us. So the more you understand how to perform a Pilates-esque routine in which you can find that experience, you not only find the experience that's very clear-minding, but it's also embracing in the ideal of the reality you're struggling to survive in. And then, of course, in the number one thing of 5 that make you capable of explaining CT and MMP, for a fee, of course, that you collect before you make the explanation. And the explanation isn't anything more than what you're capable of explaining. Because all it is a pass on the merry-go-round, or looking at the carousel. Ideally, when you pick someone up in the valley and you take them up onto a gondola ride for a look around, okay? The process of making that explanation for the look around, I think, has a much better chance of explaining if you cover it 3 times. So it's not how much, it's how familiar you want your audience to become with your message. Because the more familiar they are with it, the more they can assume it for themselves. And especially in MMP, judge it for yourself, because MMP points to an experience that you can feel, that you can be aware of. So, do you believe in Joe? See, that's the whole thing. Pilates is this wonderful culture of tradition, undefined by anything else other than tradition. But big money is definitely on scene, and I would believe has to be headed towards representing Pilates for what it is. I just think I need a couple more lifetimes to ever see that come about. So in the meantime, it's now, for whenever now is for you, and you want to survive as a Pilates instructor, the theory of the ideal within Joe's work, based on his words, it's his words. It's not anything. I'm just pointing to his words and taking them seriously and interpreting them from my point of view, that I then consider to be a point of view that others can see, and in the seeing, whatever consistency there is between the individuals that think of the view, if the view has any legitimacy at all, it will resonate with whatever others make of it, which is, I think, all that's really happening to Pilates. It's just this big needle, remember this big needle? And Pilates is so new and it's being pulled and pushed in so many different directions. I think that Pilates has an essence of its own, and I think Joe's own words point to it. It's just that they're poetic in that they're so sparse that you have to reach to make an explanation beyond the one that he does. But in making that explanation, hopefully it still embraces and encompasses what I consider to be a message within the bulk of his original work. Because these three things are just the three things that the MMP point of view is based on. There's a whole lot more of Joe's original work, his pictures, his words, and his film that reinforce the ideal point of view, the MMP point of view. That's all up for you to discover for yourself. And it's up for you to enjoy yourself. And as long as you're having fun and your students are having fun and nobody's getting hurt, you know, what does it matter? But if you're not having fun and your clients aren't having fun and you're getting hurt and they're getting hurt, something's definitely off track. And so when you go looking for refinement to what you do, add an ideal point of view. Because life can't live forever. Read between the lines and see behind the curtain. Add two and two. Evaluate points of view and allow people to pay you according to what they're able on the high end and not just the low end. Direct your thinking. Geist.